I live in a pretty small, relatively unknown town. This is the internet, so I won't divulge too much information, but I will tell you that it's in southern Wisconsin. I live on the corner of Lawn and Elm Street, and pretty near to my house is a stretch of road that most people call Muir Avenue. Of course, it's not really technically an avenue, it's just a extension of Lawn Street. And it's not the whole road, just a short stretch within the block adjacent to the one of my house on it. I've lived here my whole life, and everyone I know has referred it to Muir Avenue at some point, but many of them couldn't give me an explanation as to why it's called that. The stories I got were mostly always different, usually something about a mirror maker, or whatever you call people who made mirrors. Back when the town was founded, who got caught up in some kind of cult, and the street became cursed. Of course, the exact accounts varied. One told me by a friend in middle school included the street being split down the middle by a very long man-sized mirror. People would look into this mirror and the reflection would be doing something different, usually mischievous, and if there was more than one person in the mirror at a time, the reflections would try to hurt each other. And it was said that the people could feel pain inflicted by the reflections. This was just the ramblings of a middle schooler. And tonight, on my way home, I found out exactly why they call it Muir Avenue. I worked relatively late today, until 8 o'clock. And this being December, it got dark pretty early. I got off at 8 and decided to walk home instead of calling one of my parents. Despite being 18, I never learned to drive for financial reasons and the fact that I lived in a town small enough that there was very little that wasn't in walking distance. I walked to and from work all the time, but I usually take Elm Street instead of Lawn. It's faster, but tonight I thought since I didn't really have to be home at any specific time, I'd take the longer way. The route would take me right down Lawn Street to Muir Avenue, where I had the single most terrifying experience of my life. The walk home was pretty normal until I reached the point by the park where I would have normally diverged into Elm Street. I turned onto Lawn Street without even thinking about the whole mirror thing. Any time I had ever walked this way before was in the daytime, so I was never really afraid, and therefore it was anywhere near the front of my mind. I was only walking for about a minute before I noticed. But there was someone walking on the other side of the street. Looked over as soon as I noticed, and they did the same. I couldn't tell for sure, but they were wearing the same coat that I had on, only I couldn't see a face because they had their hood up. I walked for a few more seconds and almost tripped on the edge of an uneven piece of sidewalk. It was then that I noticed something strange. I guess I had thought more about the mirror thing before I would have expected it. But the guy on the other side of the street stumbled at the same time. I stood there for a second and then started to walk again, thinking maybe it was a fluke. But to test it, I stopped abruptly and watched to see what he did. Of course, he stopped, watching me the whole time I was watching him. And I was certain something was off. I yelled across the street at the guy, but I didn't hear anything from him. Even though he seemed to be making the same motion, it was as if I was yelling too. I stood there for about 5 minutes, waving my arms around and things like that, watching the man on the other side of the street as he mimicked me perfectly. Eventually I decided to see what would happen if I got closer, so I stepped out onto the street, and he did the same. I stopped, scared for a moment. I couldn't tell who it was because of the hood, and I wasn't sure what would happen if I got any closer. The whole time he was silently copying me. Every aspect of my movement synced perfectly as if he was my reflection. And I was thinking about the whole mirror thing, and based on the story I had heard growing up, I expected that nothing good could come of this. My curiosity got the better of me, though, and I got closer until I was just about in the very center of the road with my reflection. Just on the other side of the lane divider. I almost reached out and tried to touch it, but I was too afraid, and the last minute pulled my hand back. It was then that I heard some sort of growling from the reflection. Apparently it had wanted me to touch it. and it made this clear by mumbling from under the hood. I thought for a moment and I wanted to see if this was some sort of reflection, so I figured maybe if I put my hood up, he would end up putting his down. And so I stepped back on the sidewalk because I had uncertain as to what would happen next. And I prepared myself. I was shaking, partially in anticipation and partially because I was terrified of what might happen to me. I was obviously in some deep shit here, and as I knew now that this had to have something to do with the old legends, I stood there, my hands just above my shoulders, ready to put my hood up, with my reflection doing the same. I counted down from 10, whispering to myself and praying that this was just some kid messing with me, that it was all somehow in my head. And I got closer to 1. I shook more violently, so much that it had become apparent to my reflector was also shaking. As I finally hit 1 and put my hood up, my suspicions were confirmed as I saw the guy on the other side put his hood down. I have no way to accurately describe what I saw. The only thing that I can say is that I had my same basic features, but they were contorted and twisted in a hideous and disgusting way that left me staring at it in a horrified daze. It was smiling at me, and that's when I realized that it was no longer doing exactly as I was. I stood there on the sidewalk in shock as I stepped off the curb and began walking towards me. I panicked and ran down the street, and my reflection followed, only now it was staring at me the whole time. Not just when I was looking at it. It was faster than me, and the closer I got to the edge of the block, the closer it got to me. I was certain for a moment that I could hear it say something, but I couldn't tell what it was. Just as I was about to reach the corner, I reached out and grabbed my hood, tearing it off as I forced myself forward. I thought it had me. I thought I was dead. Another victim of Muir Avenue. But when I heard the coat rip, it was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard, and I ran like hell until I got right in the front of my house. And it was the only then that I realized that I was no longer chasing me. I assume it must have stopped when I got past the edge of the block, when it exited the stretch of Lawn Street. That was Muir Avenue. I looked back at Muir Avenue, expecting to see it standing there at the corner or something, but I couldn't see my reflection anywhere. This worried me, and I got inside as quickly as I could. My family wasn't home. They left a note saying that they had gone to Christmas shopping, and to call when I got home. The first thing I did was lock all the doors and windows and close the curtains, and then I fetched my brother's old sword that he had bought at a Renaissance fair, just in case. I called and didn't mention anything about what had happened. Later, when they finally got home, I told them that I had run into a dog, and that's why my coat was ripped. I wasn't sure if I should have said anything to anyone about it really happening or not. I was afraid that they might think I was crazy or on drugs or something. I might tell some friends at school, and there's anyone who reads this. But one thing is for certain, I'm never taking the long way home again.